was being able to take the long view and not getting too high when things were high or too low when things were low. And I had learned that throughout my life as somebody who had had some lows and had some really great highs. I didn't buy the hype when my posters were everywhere and everybody was like, yes we can and all that stuff. And I was like, well, I think I'm a pretty good guy, but I'm not gonna solve every problem on earth immediately. And conversely, when things went bad, because we had this extraordinary economic crisis and people, I think, didn't understand fully the depths of it, and despite us making all the right moves, it was going to take a while to dig ourselves out of this hole, and people were saying, the guy's a bum. I didn't get too low either. Those are the kinds of things that I think prepared me best. But those are not things you find in a manual. Or to the extent that you find them, you're finding them in your religious faith or literature or the kinds of things that sustain your soul, the things that strengthen you as a person. That's what was most important. And that's why I know this is a conference of people who are training others, who are helping others to try to achieve their best. I suspect that those of you, the times where it's worked, what you've discovered is that it's usually not just about training somebody to do a particular task. Where you're most effective training somebody else is to get them to tap into their best selves, right? And to get them to overcome their insecurities, to get them to be open to new ideas, and to get them to be respectful of the others that they're working with. Those things are most of the time what makes or breaks an organization. Now, you still actually have to know what you're doing. You can have a really nice person, but if they haven't gone to pilot school, you don't want them flying a plane. All right, but usually organizations know how to do that. They know how to transmit the specific skill that's needed. And where organizations don't do as good of a job is in tapping into and helping people develop habits that will make them better performers, that have more to do with what's in their hearts and some of the things that are blocking them, preventing them from doing a good job. And the same thing is true as President of the United States. Yes.
Let's talk about change for a little bit. Throughout your career and in many of your speeches, you return to a theme of making change happen. As people in our audience know, getting people to change their behavior, their thoughts is extremely difficult. What advice would you have for us on that?
Well, I think that for me, personally, I can't change until, number one, I recognize there's something about my current circumstance that I'm not satisfied with. So I think teaching people to be honest in assessing what their situation is really important. That's true in an organization, it's true for us personally. Look, some of you are aware that I was was a smoker for quite a long time. And Michelle, this drove her nuts. And the truth of the matter is that even though Michelle often said, why is somebody as smart as you smoking cigarettes and killing yourself? And I knew it bothered her. The truth of the matter is it didn't bother me. Because I was in good shape, I was playing basketball, I looked good. I wasn't actually fishing for those, but thank you, ladies, I appreciate it. No, but you know what I'm saying? I was not feeling the impact of it. I wasn't wheezing, I wasn't. So, no matter what I said to her, I understand, honey, yeah, I know I should stop. The truth was, the situation was okay for me. The reason I quit smoking was because I never smoked in the house. My daughters got old enough where they could kind of smell it. And they'd ask me about it. And then I had a choice of either lying to my daughters or confessing to them that yes, I was a smoker, in which case I might be passing on this horrendous habit to my children, or quitting. And I quit. And so the point, though, is that you change because you've come to a conclusion that this circumstance is not going to work. And that requires being willing to get information from others and look at yourself squarely. And that's true for an organization, it's true for an individual. That's step number one. Step number two, I think, is recognizing that change is hard. And so being able to break up change into its component parts, rather than thinking you are going to change everything overnight, I think is also important. And this is a mistake that we make in our own personal lives. It's a mistake that we make in our organizations. It's a mistake that we make in our politics, is thinking, okay, I'm going to change. New Year's resolution, all right? And then 2 weeks pass, and I can't fit in those jeans yet. I'm depressed. Let me have cake. Or in an organization, you say, we need to develop this new product line, and about 2 years out, you've made an investment, it hasn't quite popped yet, and people start getting skittish, and you say, let's just stick with what we've been doing, because that's not working. Or in politics, and this happens all the time, you get an initiative, and you haven't gotten the whole loaf, you've gotten half a loaf, and even your own supporters are really unhappy because it's not everything that they had imagined. And a great example of that was the healthcare law that we passed. Now, we provided 20 million people health insurance that didn't have it before. We cut the uninsured rate to its lowest recorded level ever. But we always understood that because we were building on a legacy system, that we couldn't just simply scrap the way healthcare had been done throughout American history and just build something entirely new. It's like a multi-trillion-dollar proposition. We had to build off of the existing system, and we were going to essentially create kind of a starter home of healthcare reform that we would then incrementally continue to build on. And obviously people know the history of how politicized it got. But what was interesting is the degree to which some Democrats, some people in my own party, were frustrated because, well, we haven't insured everybody yet. And I said, I know, this is hard, but this is the first phase, and then we're going to build on it continuously over time and refine it and make it better. That's how Social Security got started. When Social Security began, it was just a small program for widows and orphans. And there were people, for example, domestic workers were excluded from it, partly because a lot of domestic workers at the time were African American, and Southern senators didn't want to be conferring those benefits, and so they blocked those provisions. There were all kinds of things about Social Security that were screwed up. But you get it started, and then you build off of those preliminary successes. So, look, this is something I think we instinctually understand.
Yes.
But it's very hard for us to remind ourselves and then institutionalize a way of understanding change as a process that doesn't happen in one fell swoop. And the more we can anticipate that and train our people to understand that you will get better by each day applying new habits, new systems, getting accustomed to doing things differently. And don't expect perfect performance immediately, as long as you're moving in that right direction. I think that's probably one of the most important things about trying to bring about real change.
It's a great message for us to help implement change.
Well, and the last point, just to emphasize what I said earlier, part of the reason it's hard is because you're always building off a legacy system. You're always building off what is, and you're always starting from what is to get to where you want to be. And oftentimes what is isn't terrible, it just isn't as good as it could be. So you can't blame people for not wanting to rip out their existing situation, root and branch, to take a leap of faith on something entirely. You've got to build a bridge from where people are to where they want to be. And give them the confidence that that they're not flying blind, that there's a way to get there that is gradual, it takes time.
Well, believe it or not, we're actually down to our last question. I know.
You know, it's sunny out there. You guys should you don't want to just be cooped up indoors all day long. San Diego. It's nice.
It is nice.
Is there a surfing workshop while you're here?
Considering all you know and all you have experienced about the world's challenges, you are genuinely optimistic about the future. And not blindly optimistic, but genuinely optimistic. Can you share with us why?
I am cautiously optimistic. No, look, I say cautiously because we have some major challenges. There are a couple of big trends that are difficult and real. Trend number one is that technology is driving disruptive change at a pace we've never seen before. It's going to start affecting everybody here's, whatever organization you're in, whatever you do, whatever mission your organization is involved with, it is going to be changing quick. Something like artificial intelligence, the pace at which that is going to upend entire industries. Yes. Means that we're going to go through the equivalent of what happened from the agricultural era to the industrial era, which was stretched out over 100, 150 years. We're going to go through that in like 20. And it's going to be hard for our social and political institutions to adapt quickly enough. It'll put a lot of strain on our politics. We face the challenge that the world is shrinking, and so we've got to learn how to get along with people who don't look like us and don't all worship God the same way we do, and it makes people uncomfortable when they're thrown together with a bunch of people who don't look exactly like them or have exactly the same experience as they do. Now, the great news is America has a leg up on every other country in the world because we are a nation of immigrants, because we are a hodgepodge of people who came from everywhere. But truthfully, you know, when you start getting economic strains brought about by globalization and technology, that creates stress in people. And when they're stressful, there's a great temptation to say there's an us and a them as opposed to a we. And so you start getting that a certain tribalism that is dangerous and difficult. And you're seeing that not just here, but around the world. Then you have environmental problems like climate change. That is a fact, by the way. So we can have a debate about what to do about it, but it is happening, and will put some significant strains on communities around the world and can cause huge problems like migration and much more frequent natural disasters and so forth. Now, having said all that, to paraphrase JFK, there's no problem that man has caused that he can't solve. Primarily by listening to women. But that's a whole other issue. JFK didn't say that part, but I've observed that is true. But
that's a fact.
but here's what I do know though is that and I always say this to young people when I'm meeting with them and working with them. If you had to choose any moment in human history in which to be born and you didn't know ahead of time what your position would be. You didn't know whether you were going to be rich or poor, you didn't know what nation you were going to come from, male, female, what race, religion, etc. You were just kind of behind the curtain. It was sort of like a big existential let's make a deal kind of deal. So what's behind door number one? Door number two, what moment in history would you want to be born? You'd actually want to be born right now. Absolutely. Because there's never been a time in human history where, on average, across the board, there's never been a time where people were healthier, wealthier, where the world was less violent, where it was more tolerant, where it was better educated. And that doesn't detract from the incredible tragedies and cruelty and corruption and just plain mean stuff that is happening day to day. All that's real, and it's heartbreaking, and we have to insist that we can do better than we're doing right now. But the arc, the trajectory of human history has been progress. Things have gotten better. 50 years ago, it would have been unimaginable for me to be sitting here addressing it. That's I'm 56 now. I was 6 years old. And that's a blink of an eye in human history. And think about what's happened in this country just during that period of time. And so that's why I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm optimistic because the trend lines so far are pretty good if you kind of take the long view. But they're not, but I'm cautiously optimistic because that progress is not inevitable. That progress is the result of each of us individually taking responsibility for making things a little bit better. It means that in your organizations, you're taking responsibility to make sure that the people you work with are treating each other with respect, that you are encouraging women's voices to be heard and the meeting, that you are treating the LGBT person with respect and dignity, that you are insisting on continually improving performance and holding accountability, and this is all on your work and then in your communities, that you are making sure that our kids are getting a decent education. You're taking that upon yourself if you see that they're not, and that we're willing to pay some taxes to support things like public schools and universities so that everybody has an equal opportunity, and that we are good stewards for the environment. If each of us take that responsibility, understanding that no single one of us can solve every problem. If we can have a sense of humor and be forgiving about our foibles and our flaws, knowing that none of us are perfect, but we all have a responsibility to make the world a better place. And if, as I told my daughters, if you're kind and you're useful, you're probably going to live a pretty good life. If all of us are doing our part in that way, we'll figure it out. We'll be okay. All right? Thank you, everybody. Great talking.